40 years ago, fascinating story. 40 years ago, there was a Supreme Court case involving the Chevron Corporation, EPA, and Environmental Defense Agency organization. The short version is that the Supreme Court ruling at the time gave the power, basically said, hey, agencies are experts, we judges are not. So when a law is written ambiguously, we should give deference to the agency. And as it turns out, the head of the EPA at that time, and this was a win for the EPA, the head of the EPA was Neil Gorsuch's mother. Neil Gorsuch is a Supreme Court judge. His mother was head of the EPA at this time. Now, this it basically says when there's a law that is ambiguous, say is crypto a security or a commodity, if it is ambiguous, the courts should defer to the agency expertise, basically. And this has been used to varying degrees by both Republicans and Democrats. Republicans used it actually to reduce a lot of protections in the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act under Bush W. People might remember that. But then that turned very hard the other way under Obama and also under Biden. And so, for example, the EPA in particular, this has had huge implications. I mean, we haven't had immigration law in God knows how many, 50 years. So like everything that is done is interpreted by the agencies and courts give them deference.
When you say agencies, you're talking about the regulators, right? The SEC, the CFTC.
Yes,
these are the agencies.
The regulators.
Yeah.
The executive agency regulators, okay? So, and the courts simply have to defer to them. Over the Supreme Court is currently very conservative, as most people know, and has taken a couple of strikes at this Chevron Deference. Again, goes back to the original company Chevron Corporation 40 years ago. Has taken a couple strikes at it. Most recently was actually last year. They did what was called the major questions doctrine. The Coinbase actually took advantage of that decision as in part of their defense against the SEC. The idea being that, hey, the court said, hey, if a topic is of national significance, it's a major question, the court should not defer to the agency, for example, right? But then the question is like, what's a major question, right? Well, in October of last year, not many people noticed it. I almost missed it. The Supreme Court agreed to hear a case of, I believe it's herring fishermen. There's actually two cases. One's called Relentless. The other is called Loper Bright v. Raimondo. Raimondo is the head of Commerce. And what's at issue here is basically that these fishermen, there was a law passed years ago that said that the National Marine Fisheries should require observers on commercial fishing boats. The problem was that it cost money, and the Congress did not say how to pay for it, and they didn't provision money for it, and so the agency interpreted it to say that they could charge the fishing boats. It turns out that, and this is you see this in the case, that the cost of having an observer on every single boat was going to cost as much as 20% of the profits for these fishermen. So they sued, and they lost straight up into the district circuit, the DC circuit, where Ketanji Brown Jackson was sitting at the time, and they lost based on the National Marine Fishery Commerce Department claiming Chevron Deference, that they had written these rules under Chevron Deference. Of course, this was then appealed by Loper Bright Enterprises, the name of the fishing boat company, and the SEC the Supreme Court accepted the case. So they had three options. They could hear the case on its merit, they could hear the case on curtailing Chevron Deference, or completely removing Chevron Deference, striking it down. And they elected the latter two. And Ketanji Brown Jackson is recused from that case, having previously heard it. As a result, the conservatives on the court, led by Neil Gorsuch, whose mother originally is responsible for this being in place, he's leading the charge to remove Chevron Deference. And so they don't have just a normal majority as they normally do. They have a super majority because one of the liberal justices is recused. And we must, the way that the Supreme Court term works is they accept cases, and it runs from October to June. So any day now, it's June 4th when we're recording this, could be this coming Monday, it could be the Monday after, but anytime in the next, I would say 2 to 3 weeks, we are likely to get a decision in Loper Bright v. Raimondo on Chevron Deference. And, you know, if you Google this, you're going to see articles that talk about the potential chaos that could ensue from this, because the agency's ability under Chevron Deference to interpret and write rules and regulations was so broad, it stretches across finance, it stretches across, like I said, immigration and the environment. But in the hearing, you should go and listen to the oral arguments for the Supreme Court. Crypto comes up a number of times in the oral arguments. And it's even used as an extreme example of how Chevron Deference has effectively caused a problem where this quote, uniquely 21st century phenomena, digital currencies, is seeing overreach by a regulator that clearly doesn't have authority. So the implication there being that if and when, most likely, I would say 90+% probability, Chevron is at minimum significantly curtailed, if not completely removed, there will be no question but that like the regulator assault on crypto is basically done. I mean, it's done. And that actually has significant implications about whether or not you actually want to see legislation. Like, as it stands, I can tell you, I personally do not want any legislation passed. It's much better. Like, we're so early in crypto. If you write something with a certain definition or understanding now, it may not be relevant 6 months from now, much less 30 years from now. And it is almost impossible to get something taken out of law once it is put in law. This is why you hear about like these laws from like the 1800s. They like very difficult to repeal them. Arizona is having to do this now in the context of Roe v. Wade and the abortion decision. There's like 1800s law that they're having to quickly repeal. So you don't want. I mean, I think, in my opinion, with the exception maybe of a very narrow stablecoin bill, I personally would just prefer to have no regulation. And that is especially true because almost any day now, the agencies are going to be completely neutered. The SEC is going to be done. Their assault on crypto is basically going to be cut off at the legs. I think they know that. And I think it's one of the reasons why they have implicitly, kind of pivoted.
So this is cool. So just like maybe just to connect the dots and then, finish this out. So if Chevron deference is overturned, then it defangs one of the core problems that crypto's had with regulators, which is like regulatory overreach. These unelected officials, Gary Genslers of the world, that are basically like hating on crypto and doing everything they can to just like put up roadblocks, and it completely defangs that. And I guess if we were able to thread the needle, at least in the US, is we'd have aggressive regulators defanged from their ability to do kind of like over a broad rulemaking. Overreach. And then we'd also probably have a hung Congress, at least for a while, so that they only get through legislation on like stablecoin bills, and they don't go full, like prying into the business and trying to overregulate everything, which would draw us into a quagmire in crypto. Very interesting. I had no idea that case had anything to do with crypto, and so it's a big deal. Yeah, it sounds like it's a big deal.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.